Buffalo was once treated by many observers as an old Mafia city whose serious power had faded. New York City still had the five families. New Jersey still had active crews. Philadelphia still produced headlines. New England still carried the Patriarcha name. Buffalo, by contrast, was often described as a place where the old organization had aged out, lost influence, or become too quiet to count as a major American mafia lane. Then, the Pharaoh's case moved through federal court, and Western New York returned to the center of the modern organized crime conversation. This episode begins with one location, Pharaoh's Gentlemen's Club in Cheektowaga outside Buffalo. The building was not important only as a nightclub. Federal prosecutors described it as a drug-involved premises, a place tied to commercial sex exploitation, narcotics activity, witness pressure, bribery, and protection from a corrupt federal agent. In May of 2026, Peter Genovese, the former owner of Pharaoh's, was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. The sentence came after a jury convicted him of conspiracy to commit sex trafficking, drug trafficking, defrauding the United States, witness tampering, maintaining a drug-involved premises, and bribing a public official. Genovese's name gave the case its organized crime weight. Local reporting has long identified him as the nephew of Joseph A. Todaro, the reputed head of the Buffalo Mafia, while Todaro has denied organized crime allegations, and those claims were not proven in court. That distinction has to stay clear. The Pharaoh's conviction did not legally prove that the entire Buffalo Mafia returned as a fully open empire. What it did show was that federal prosecutors, local investigators, journalists, and Mafia researchers were again looking at Western New York as a living organized crime environment, not only an old file from the 1970s and 1980s. The case also brought in Joseph Bongiovanni, a retired DEA special agent. His role changed the meaning of the entire story. This was not only a club owner committing crimes while law enforcement slowly closed in. Prosecutors said a federal narcotics agent used his authority to shield Genovese and others from investigation. Bongiovanni had served with the DEA from 1998 until February of 2019, and from 2001 onward, he was assigned to the Buffalo resident office. In January of 2026, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison after convictions that included conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to distribute a controlled substance, obstruction of justice, and making false statements to law enforcement. A corrupt agent changes the field. Drug trafficking cases depend on confidential sources, surveillance, search warrants, deconfliction systems, case files, informant protection, and coordination between agencies. When the corrupt person sits inside that system, he does not need to carry drugs or run a street crew. He can damage the investigation before it reaches the target. Prosecutors said Bongiovanni warned protected people about investigations, revealed sensitive law enforcement information, exposed informants, manipulated case files, and steered attention away from people he wanted to protect. The Pharaoh's case shows the danger of access. Genovese controlled the club. Bongiovanni had federal law enforcement access. The club generated crime allegations. The agent allegedly helped block scrutiny. That arrangement, as described by prosecutors, created a protected space. Drugs could move. Vulnerable people could be exploited. Witnesses could be pressured. Investigators could be misdirected. The public saw a nightlife business. Federal prosecutors described a criminal operation with a federal shield. The timeline is important. Prosecutors said Genovese owned and operated Pharaoh's between 2005 and 2019. That is not a short burst of misconduct. That is a long period of operation across multiple administrations, investigations, and law enforcement shifts. During that time, prosecutors said Genovese engaged in criminal activity that included controlled substance distribution, conspiracy, sex trafficking, bribery of Bongiovanni, and witness tampering. The length of the timeline explains why the case carried so much force in Western New York. It suggested not one bad night, but a system that lasted for years. Pharaoh sat in Cheektowaga, part of the Buffalo area geography that gives this episode its identity. Western New York is not Manhattan. It is not South Philadelphia. It is not North Jersey. It is a border region, close to Canada, shaped by older Italian-American communities. Trucking routes, bars, labor contacts, cross-border traffic, local politics, and neighborhoods where names can remain known for decades. Organized crime in such a place does not always need a large public profile. Local reputation can carry practical force. For decades, Buffalo Mafia history centered on the Magaddino and Todaro eras. Stefano Magaddino, one of the old national mafia figures, made Western New York part of the national La Cosa Nostra structure. The family's reach was often discussed in relation to Buffalo, Niagara Falls, Rochester, Hamilton, Ontario, and cross-border activity. By the late 20th century, federal pressure, death, prison, changing rackets, and generational shifts weakened the public image of the organization. Some investigators and writers began treating Buffalo as nearly finished. Then newer cases reopened the argument. The Genovese and Bongiovanni prosecutions became part of that argument. Federal authorities did not need to prove a full mafia hierarchy to win the Pharaoh's case. They proved crimes tied to Genovese and Bongiovanni. But the surrounding record brought organized crime questions back into the room. Prosecutors said Bongiovanni protected people he believed were members or associates of Italian organized crime in Buffalo. That phrase is careful. It does not require every person named to be a made member. It shows what the corrupt agent believed, how he acted, and which people he allegedly shielded. Bongiovanni's case also involved Michael Masecchia, a former Buffalo schoolteacher described by prosecutors as having connections to Italian organized crime. The government said Bongiovanni provided Masecchia and others involved in distributing marijuana, cocaine, and fentanyl pills with sensitive information about investigations, informants, techniques, and tactics. That is one of the most serious forms of corruption in narcotics enforcement. A trafficker with inside knowledge can avoid arrests, change patterns, identify informants, and continue operating while honest agents chase bad information. The government described Bongiovanni creating and using a DEA case file to protect people under investigation. That detail is one of the strongest teaching points in the episode. A case file is supposed to organize an investigation. In the government's account, Bongiovanni used a case file as a control point. Other agencies and agents could defer to him. Deconfliction databases could alert him when protected people appeared in other investigations. He could see where pressure was coming from. He could adjust. He could keep certain people away from full exposure. This is the modern version of criminal protection at a high level. In older mafia stories, protection often meant a corrupt officer ignoring a gambling room or warning someone before a raid. In this case, prosecutors described a federal agent using modern law enforcement systems from inside the government. The badge, the database, the official memorandum, the case file, and the investigative chain became part of the corruption. The street did not defeat law enforcement from outside. It allegedly entered the enforcement process through a trusted official. Genovese's conviction brought the Pharaoh's side to its legal conclusion. On December 27, 2024, a federal jury convicted him of multiple charges, including conspiracy to defraud the United States, bribery, sex trafficking conspiracy, maintaining a drug-involved premises, narcotics conspiracy, witness tampering, and cocaine distribution. On May 13, 2026, Judge Lawrence J. Velado sentenced him to 25 years in prison. The sentence closed one of the biggest Buffalo area criminal cases of the modern period. The phrase, maintaining a drug-involved premises, gives the audience a direct way to understand Pharaoh's in the government's theory. The club was not presented only as a site where occasional illegal conduct happened. Prosecutors treated it as a place where drug activity was part of the operation. That charge connects a physical business to narcotics crime. It turns the building itself into evidence of an ongoing criminal environment. The sex trafficking conviction requires a careful tone. Prosecutors said Genovese forced and coerced dancers at Pharaoh's into commercial sex acts. This was not an entertainment scandal, it was a victim case. The club's business image cannot be allowed to cover the human cost. People were exploited, threatened, and harmed. The law enforcement corruption around the case made that harm worse, since a protected operator can keep victims trapped longer and make reporting feel impossible. Witness tampering added another layer. Organized crime and trafficking cases depend heavily on witnesses. A victim, employee, customer, associate, or informant can break a case open. If witnesses are intimidated, moved, silenced, discredited, or pressured, the case weakens before trial. Genovese's conviction included witness tampering. In a case already involving a corrupt DEA agent, that charge showed how the operation could attack the justice system from several directions at once. The bribery count placed Genovese and Bongiovanni in the same central lane. Prosecutors said Genovese paid Bongiovanni so the agent would discourage law enforcement investigations into Pharaoh's activity. That is the core of the scandal. A club owner facing federal scrutiny paid a DEA agent. The agent used his position to keep heat away. In narcotics enforcement, that is not a small favor. It can redirect years of investigative work. It can keep drugs moving. It can leave victims exposed. It can damage trust between agencies. Bongiovanni's sentencing in January of 2026 came with a complicated public record. The AP reported that prosecutors had sought 15 years, while the judge imposed 5 years after mixed verdicts and lengthy trials. Bongiovanni's defense maintained his innocence and said they would continue challenging the outcome. That complexity should be included. A serious documentary does not flatten the record. It explains the conviction, the sentence, the government's theory, the defense position, and the court's final action. The broader DEA issue also sits behind this episode. Federal drug enforcement relies on agents operating with enormous discretion. They cultivate sources. They decide which targets to pursue. They handle sensitive information. They enter names into systems. They work across local, state, and federal investigations. When one agent corrupts that position over many years, the damage spreads beyond one defendant. Old cases can be questioned. Informants can be exposed. Traffickers can avoid charges. Honest agents can lose public trust. Western New York gives this story a special pressure. Buffalo is a border city with a long, organized crime memory. Niagara Falls and southern Ontario sit near the same historical lane. The old Buffalo family had Canadian connections in earlier generations, and modern reporting has repeatedly raised questions about whether parts of that network remained active or revived through Ontario-linked figures. That wider geography does not mean every local case is Mafia-directed. It means the region has a history that investigators and audiences cannot ignore when new organized crime allegations surface. The return of Western New York should be taught as a question, not a slogan. Did the Buffalo Mafia come back as a full old-style family with formal ranks, crews, tributes, and cross-border authority? That requires evidence case by case. Did federal prosecutions, local reporting, and courtroom records show that Italian organized crime remained part of the criminal conversation in Buffalo? Yes. Did the Pharaoh's case put a reputed organized crime relative, a corrupt DEA agent, drug trafficking, commercial sex exploitation, and witness pressure into one modern federal story? Yes. That is why this lane deserves a full episode. Genovese's public profile also changed the story. He was not presented as a nameless street dealer. He owned a known club. He had local recognition. He had family connections that reporters tied to the reputed Buffalo Mafia leadership. He had a relationship with a DEA agent. He had a business site where prosecutors said crimes occurred over many years. Those elements made the case bigger than a routine narcotics prosecution. The name, location, corruption, and region all gave the prosecution historical weight. Pharaoh's also shows how nightlife businesses can become criminal hubs when oversight fails. A club can create cash flow, private rooms, late hours, customer anonymity, drug access, employee vulnerability, and security control. Criminal operators can use those conditions to hide narcotics, exploit workers, and intimidate people who depend on the job for income. When a corrupt law enforcement figure protects the operator, ordinary checks weaken. Police attention can be discouraged, investigations can be delayed, victims can believe nobody will listen. The Buffalo case also connects to a larger modern mafia pattern. The organization does not always need to dominate an entire city. It can survive through smaller points of control. A club, a narcotics lane, a bookmaking operation, a construction contact, a union relationship, a corrupt official, a border connection. These pieces can exist even when the public image of the family looks weak. The modern mafia often appears through fragments that connect only after investigators pull records, phone data, bank trails, witness statements, and informant accounts together. Bongiovanni's conduct, as described by prosecutors, also reveals how corruption can protect more than one person. The government said he protected friends, associates, and individuals he believed were linked to Italian organized crime. He provided information about investigations and informants. He used a DEA case file to control other agencies' access. He entered protected people into deconfliction systems in ways that alerted him to other investigations. In plain terms, he allegedly turned a law enforcement network into an early warning system for criminals. For audiences familiar with old mafia stories, this is an updated version of the same old arrangement. Pay for protection, receive warning, avoid prosecution, continue earning. The difference is the level of access. A local beat officer can warn a gambling room. A federal narcotics agent can interfere with multi-agency drug cases. The scale of harm is greater. The information is more sensitive. The people exposed to danger include informants, victims, and officers working outside the corrupt circle. The Pharaoh's case also shows how human trafficking, narcotics, and organized crime can overlap without needing to be identical. The drug operation can bring in customers and control. The trafficking operation can exploit vulnerable workers. The corruption operation can keep investigators away. The witness tampering operation can protect the whole structure after law enforcement arrives. Each lane supports the others. The result is a criminal environment with several forms of pressure working at the same time. The sentencing of Genovese to 25 years gave prosecutors a major public result. It showed that the federal government could break through the protection structure, present the case to a jury, win convictions, and secure a long prison term. The sentencing also gave Western New York a new reference point. Buffalo's organized crime question could no longer be dismissed as only old rumor or nostalgia. The federal record now contained a modern corruption and exploitation case tied to the region's continuing organized crime debate. The sentencing of Bongiovanni to 5 years created a different public reaction. Some saw the sentence as light when compared with the government's request and the harm prosecutors described. Others noted the mixed verdicts, the complexity of the case, and the judge's view of Bongiovanni's prior law enforcement record. For documentary purposes, that tension is useful. It shows how corruption cases can leave the public unsatisfied even after conviction. The badge gave him power, and the sentence forced people to ask how the justice system should punish an official who helped criminals avoid the same system he served.
If you haven't already, please take a second to subscribe to the channel, and also don't forget to click on the notification bell so you'll be up to date on all videos released from the Everything Network.
Boss, Michael Mikey Nose Mancuso, current leader of the family, a Bronx native, he is the son of Anthony Tony Nose Mancuso, a Lucchese family soldier who was shot to death inside a bar in 1967, when Michael was 12 years old. He became affiliated with the East Harlem Purple Gang in his early adulthood, and was injured in a shootout with a rival crew in Williamsburg, Brooklyn in 1976, subsequently being arrested on weapons charges, for which he would be convicted 2 years later. In 1984, Mancuso shot and killed his wife Evelina during a domestic dispute, later dumping her body on a bench in front of Jacobi Medical Center. He was convicted of manslaughter in 1986 and sentenced to 10 years in prison, being released in 1996. After regaining his freedom, he became a member of the Bonanno family and acted as a conspirator in the murder of Capo Gelando, George from Canada Siasia, in 1999. In 2004, Vincent Vinnie Gorgeous Bassiano promoted Mancuso to acting underboss, then to acting boss, after Bassiano was arrested on racketeering charges in November of that year. On November 30, 2004, acting on Bassiano's orders, along with Capo Dominic Cicale and soldier Anthony A. Aiello, he had associate Randolph Pizzolo killed for infuriating Bassiano. Mancuso and his co-conspirators were indicted on racketeering and murder charges stemming from Pizzolo's killing in 2006, pleading guilty in 2008 and being sentenced to 15 years in prison. Authorities believe he was appointed as official boss of the family after he began serving his sentence, and he controlled the organization from prison through a series of acting bosses. Mancuso was released from prison on March 12, 2019, with 3 years conditional release to serve. Highly on parole, he regularly met with fellow mobsters and associates, and he was arrested on supervised release violation charges on March 15, 2022. After pleading guilty, Mancuso was sentenced to 11 months in prison and another 3 years supervised release on July 28, 2023, and he surrendered to prison authorities on September 6. He is currently incarcerated at FCI Allenwood Low, Pennsylvania, and is scheduled for release on August 4, 2024. Acting boss Johnny Skyway Palazzolo, current de facto leader for Michael Mancuso, a fellow member of the family's Bronx faction. Palazzolo was inducted into the organization in 1977 and remained active in criminal activity ever since, mainly operating extortion, loan sharking, and fraud rackets. In 1978, he served as a backup shooter in the attempted murder of associate Anthony Coglator, who was shot 11 times as he entered the driveway of his Staten Island home as retribution for having tried to kill a member of the family. Palazzolo was also involved in the murder of soldier Russell Morrow in 1991, luring him to the Black Eagle Social Club in Astoria, Queens, where soldier Joseph, Joe Desi, DeSimone, and associate Peter, Petey Boxcars Cosoletto shot him to death, with Palazzolo cleaning up the scene and disposing of Morrow's corpse. In 1994, he was convicted of interstate theft and sentenced to 2 years in prison, though he was later found guilty of running a loan sharking ring from inside FCI Allenwood Low, along with his father James and his son James Pallas, and his sentence was extended by 57 months. In 2004, Palazzolo was indicted along with acting boss Anthony Tony Green Urso and 25 other defendants on racketeering and murder charges. He pled guilty to conspiring to murder Mauro and was sentenced to 10 years in prison, as well as being fined $100 in 2006. Upon his release in 2014, Palazzolo was promoted to street boss, but was arrested a year later for violating his parole due to having met with family members Anthony Fat Anthony Rabito and Frankie Boy Salerno. He was sentenced to 1 year in prison. In 2019, Michael Mancuso named Palazzolo acting boss to replace Joseph Joe C. Camerano Jr., whom he had recently shelved. Underboss Johnny Joe Spirito. Longtime family member, Spirito was involved in the 1999 murder of Captain Gelando Sciascia and was sentenced to 20 years in prison after conviction. Former family underboss Salvatore Vitale provided testimony to convict Spirito. He was released from prison on supervised release on September 1, 2020. Spirito is currently a target of the supervised release investigation of family boss Michael Mancuso and has been cited as the family's number 2. Consigliere Vincent Vinni TV. Badalamenti became family consigliere in 2019. He is the former capo of the Bensonhurst crew. Badalamenti has served as the former acting boss and consigliere. In December 2009, Badalamenti was found with Staten Island-based Captain Anthony Calabrese and soldier Johnny Green Farriseth meeting at a Bensonhurst storefront. He served as acting boss from early 2010 until 2012, when he was imprisoned. Little Anthony Pipitone, captain operating in Queens, Brooklyn, and Long Island, on October 7, 2009, Pipitone was indicted along with Capo Joseph Sammartino, Capo Anthony Sclafani, acting captain Joseph Loiacono, soldiers Frank Pastore and Paul Spina, among other members on racketeering charges. In June 2016, Pipitone was sentenced to 2 years in prison for violating his parole when he attended a Bonanno family Christmas party on Staten Island. Pipitone had served time in prison for stabbing 2 men after they had broken windows of a mob-connected restaurant in Whitestone, Queens. On August 16, 2022, Pipitone was among 9 men arrested, including his younger brother Vito, and charged with racketeering, money laundering, illegal gambling, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and other charges. Members from the Bonanno, as well as the Genovese families, were arrested. The group used front businesses in Queens and Long Island to launder illegal profit. Pipitone was released on $2 million bond. Ernest Ernie Aiello, captain operating in the Bronx. He used to be an acting captain for Nicky Mouth Santora, along with Vito Badamo. In 2012, he and acting captain John Spirito Jr., as well as 20 to 25 Bonanno mobsters, stormed the Lucchese family-managed Coddington Club in the Bronx as a show of force. The incident emerged after Lucchese family acting boss Matthew Madonna stated he did not recognize Michael Mancuso as the Bonanno family boss. On July 9, 2013, Aiello and 8 other Bonanno family mobsters, including Santora and Badamo, were indicted on enterprise corruption, gambling, loan sharking, extortion, and drug trafficking charges. The case ended in a mistrial on May 10, 2016, along with Capo John Ciromano and soldier John Spirito Jr. Aiello stormed the Glen Cove funeral home, where a service was held honoring former captain Vito Grimaldi. The trio assaulted former acting boss Joseph Camerano Jr. and his brother Dino, allegedly on the orders of Michael Mancuso. Louis Atanasio, a former captain in the Bronx. Atanasio, along with his brother Robert and Peter Calabrese, murdered Bonanno family Sicilian faction member Cesare Bonv in 1984. On September 20, 2006, Atanasio and Peter Calabrese were sentenced to 15 years in prison for the 1984 Bonventure murder. Atanasio's projected release date is January 23, 2018. His brother, only an associate of the Bonanno family, was sentenced to 2 years of supervised release and ordered to home confinement with GPS monitoring for the first 6 months by senior United States District Judge Nicholas Garofis. He was accused of affiliating with members of the Bonanno and Gambino crime families, including playing bocce with Louis Valario, a captain of the Gambino crime family, which Atanasio pled guilty to. It was also revealed that Robert Atanasio was suffering from prostate cancer in 2017. He was released from prison on January 23, 2018. Thomas Tommy Di Fiora, a former acting boss and former capo. In 1979, Di Fiore was thrown out of the Giaccone crew for getting into an argument with Capo Philip Giaccone. By 1990, Di Fiore had become a captain in the family and handled most of the actives on Long Island. In May 2000, Di Fiore and two members of the Gambino crime family, Capo Salvatore Scala and soldier Charles Carneglia, were arrested and charged with extortion. The FBI had recorded a mob sit-down on May 3, 2000, between Di Fiore, Scala, and Carneglia over who had the right to extort Cherry Video, a sex shop on Long Island. On November 2, 2001, all three were sentenced to 63 months for extortion. Di Fiore was released from prison on March 19, 2004. In 2013, he became the family underboss and acting boss for imprisoned boss Michael Mancuso. In January 2014, he was arrested on extortion charges along with Vincent Asaro. He was released from prison on August 4, 2015. John Booby Serrasani was a Bonanno family soldier and right-hand man to Sonny Black Napolitano. Serrasani was involved in the 1981 murders of three warring captains Alphonse Indelicato, Dominic Trinchera and Philip Giaccone. On July 26, 1982, Serrasani, Benjamin Lefty Ruggiero, Anthony Rabito, Nicholas Santora and Antonio Tomasulo were tried in Manhattan Federal District Court. Serrasani was later acquitted. Anthony Scalfani, former capo based in Staten Island with illegal gambling operations. On October 7, 2009, Sclafani was indicted along with Captain Joseph Sammartino, Captain Anthony Pipitone, Acting Captain Joseph Loiacono, and soldiers Frank Pastore and Paul Spina, among other members, on racketeering and loan sharking charges. It was revealed in the case that Sclafani had owed $50,000 to Capo Joseph Sammartino. Sclafani tried to stay out of law enforcement surveillance by staying in his home all day. He controlled illegal gambling from a social club on Victory Boulevard that was named after a Staten Island youth league. Sclafani was released from prison on February 14, 2014.
If you haven't already, please take a second to subscribe to the channel, and also don't forget to click on the notification bell so you'll be up to date on all videos released from the Everything Network.
You're watching the Everything Network. Daniel Pagano is an alleged New York mobster and a captain in the Genovese crime family who was involved in a famous gasoline bootlegging racket of the 1980s. Born in New York, he is the son of Joe Pagano, a senior Genovese mobster. In 1973, the New York Police Department arrested Pagano for selling narcotics to undercover officers. During the arrest, he was shot in the back by police while leaning against a police car. In the early 80s, he became acquainted with activist Al Sharpton. Colombo crime family former mobster and current YouTuber Michael Franzese allegedly arranged a meeting with Pagano, Sharpton, and another mob associate, who was an undercover FBI agent. The meeting was ostensibly about the mob associate asking Sharpton for an introduction to boxing promoter Don King. However, during the meeting, the associate unsuccessfully tried to enlist Sharpton's assistance in distributing narcotics. After the meeting, the FBI approached Sharpton and allegedly garnered his assistance as an informant against Pagano. However, Sharpton denies this claim to this day. In the late 1980s, Pagano became a maidman, or full member, of the Genovese family. He operated in the Bronx and Manhattan, and was close to Genovese Captain Dominic "Quiet Dom" Cirillo. With the incarceration of Genovese soldier Joseph Joe Glitz Galizia, Pagano was promoted to captain. He oversaw the family's numbers game and sports betting rackets in East Harlem, which were operated by the Pisacano brothers. Pagano also owned a business interest in Third World Records, an African Latino music label in New York. Pagano was indicted in June of 1989 on charges of illegal gambling, loan sharking and extortion in Westchester County and Rockland County, north of New York City. Pagano and his associates mediated disputes between trash haulers in the area exercised control over a waterfront construction project in Yonkers, New York, and conducted loan sharking activities. Pagano eventually pleaded guilty to criminal usury and promoting gambling. After becoming capo, Pagano became the Genovese family contact in the gasoline bootlegging rackets. Originated in the 1980s by a Soviet Jewish crime family led by Marat Balagula and based in Brighton Beach, Brooklyn, the scam involved fake transactions of large quantities of gasoline and diesel that defrauded the state of New York out of hundreds of millions in excise taxes. When the New York's Cosa Nostra families discovered the scam, the Genovese and 3 other families forced Organizzatia to pay them a cut of their illegal profits. The families set up a group known as the Association to run the scam. Pagano and his trusted aide, mobster Anthony Colombo, represented the Genovese interests in the association. In late 1992 or early 1993, Pagano thwarted a proposed murder of a Russian mobster. Colombo's business partner, Russian mobster Viktor Zilba, asked him to arrange the murder of a Zilba employee, Russian mobster Monya Elson. When Colombo approached Pagano for approval, Pagano immediately vetoed the hit. Pagano was afraid that killing Elson would cause major problems with the Organizzatia. In the early 1990s, the FBI set up a fake fuel company in Trenton, New Jersey, as part of Red Daisy, a sting operation aimed against the bootlegging ring. In February 1992, a suspicious fire destroyed the company facilities. Soon after the fire, a mob associate approached the company owners and informed them that they would have to pay a mob tax to sell the bootleg gasoline. In September 1996, Pagano and Colombo were indicted on charges of defrauding the government of $77 million in tax revenues. In September 1999, Pagano pleaded guilty to motor fuel tax evasion and was sentenced to 105 months in prison. As a result of his imprisonment, Pagano lost control of many of his former rackets, including the Pisacano brothers' illegal gambling operation. On May 12, 2007, he was released from federal prison. You're watching the Everything Network. Carmine Romano was a New York mobster and captain in the Genovese crime family who controlled the Fulton Fish Market distribution center in downtown Manhattan. Beginning in the 1920s, the Fulton Fish Market had been controlled by mobsters. Unloading crews would extort parking fees and kickbacks from out-of-town fish companies. If a company refused to pay, the unloaders would let the fish spoil. Mob employees and mob-controlled companies received special benefits. The market's security force operated a protection racket for retail shops and vehicles located on the margins of the market waterfront. Authorities made some small efforts to clean up the corruption. In the late 1970s, Romano was removed from the leadership of the seafood union for extorting wholesalers and enforcing a cartel. Finally, in 1981, mob boss Romano was shifting control into New Jersey to his younger crew. Herman Weiner took control of operations in New Jersey and was untouched for many years. Later in 1982, Romano was convicted of racketeering and sent to prison for 14 years. However, the Genovese domination of the market continued. Before going to prison in 1981, Carmine Romano tried to intimidate the current non-mob owner of his restaurant into selling it back to his uncle. According to court documents, Romano and associates visited the owner on the morning of January 21, 1981. They began their visit by breaking glasses, smashing all the windows, mirrors, tables, and chairs. Food was also thrown around, destroying the coffee and cigarette machines, in addition to yanking the stove out of the wall. Finally, they robbed the cash register and left. Despite this attempt at intimidation, the owner refused to sell it back. In 1994, new mayor Rudy Giuliani launched a campaign to end mob control of the market. Through civil suits and new regulations, the city expelled mob employees and vendors and ended the extortion rackets against honest seafood vendors. The Genovese family retaliated with arson and wildcat strikes, but were unable to stop the city. In 1999, Romano was released from prison and moved to New Bedford, Massachusetts, where he was the owner of high-grade ocean products. In November 2005, the City of New York moved all seafood wholesale operations to a new facility in Hunts Point in the Bronx and permanently closed the Fulton fish market. Romano died January 28, 2011, in New Bedford. Ralph, the Undertaker Balsamo, is an alleged captain of the Genovese crime family with operations in the Bronx, Manhattan, and Westchester. His nickname, the Undertaker, comes from him owning funeral homes in the Bronx. In 2007, Balsamo pled guilty to narcotics trafficking, firearms trafficking, extortion, and union-related fraud and was sentenced to 8 years in prison. On March 8, 2013, he was released. However, in August of 2016, he was indicted along with 45 other members from other crime families and was held in detention until trial. He was again released from prison on July 23, 2018. Balsamo was arrested on April 12, 2022, on racketeering charges. According to an indictment unsealed on April 26, 2022, he and 5 other co-defendants, including Captain Nicholas Calisi, operated a criminal racketeering enterprise since at least 2011. Balsamo pled guilty to racketeering on February 9, 2023. Balsamo is a member of Bellomo's inner circle and is the possible successor to an administrative position within the family. Born in 1945, Pasquale Patsy Pirello is allegedly the current consigliere of the Genovese crime family. He was a long-time captain who was operating in the Bronx. He owns a restaurant on Arthur Avenue called Pasquale's Rigoletto Restaurant. In 2004, he was found guilty of loan sharking and embezzlement along with Captain Rosario Gangi and was sentenced to 88 months. Patsy was released from prison on April 23, 2008. In August of 2016, Pirello was indicted along with Genovese family captain Conrad Ianiello and Genovese family acting captain Eugene Onorfio and Philadelphia crime family boss Joey Merlino, along with 42 other mobsters on gambling and extortion charges. In May 2017, he pled guilty to 3 counts of conspiracy to commit extortion and was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison in September 2017. Prosecutors at his trial alleged that in June 2011, he ordered 2 of his soldiers to break the kneecaps of a man who annoyed female patrons at his restaurant. Pirello was released from prison on January 19, 2022. In 2023, he was allegedly promoted to the family's administration, taking over as the family's new advisor.
If you haven't already, please take a second to subscribe to the channel, and also don't forget to click on the notification bell, so you'll be up to date on all videos released from the Everything Network. If you haven't already, please take a second to subscribe to the channel, and also don't forget to click on the notification bell, so you'll be up to date on all videos released from the Everything Network.
The modern American Mafia no longer has to look like the old street empire of corner social clubs, trucking yards, and bookmaking slips passed by hand. In the 21st century, organized crime can sit beside legal sports betting apps, underground poker rooms, encrypted phones, cash couriers, shell companies, online sportsbooks, and famous names used as bait. The case that placed the NBA beside La Cosa Nostra did not begin as a single story. It came forward as 2 connected federal lanes, one involving alleged sports betting fraud through non-public NBA information, and another involving rigged high-stakes poker games backed by organized crime families. The public saw the names first: Terry Rozier, Damon Jones, Chauncey Billups, and a long roster of alleged operators, bettors, game organizers, technology suppliers, money movers, and mafia-linked figures. To understand this case properly, the first thing to teach is the difference between legal gambling and corrupted gambling. Legal sports betting is built on risk, posted lines, public information, and the idea that the bettor and the sportsbook are working from fair access to the game. Corrupted betting uses inside information or altered performance to attack the market before it can defend itself. In the NBA lane, prosecutors alleged that private locker room and medical information became a weapon. In the poker lane, prosecutors alleged that the table itself was turned against the victim through hidden technology and organized cheating teams. These were not the same operation in every detail, but they belonged to the same modern gambling world where status, access, and trust could be converted into money. The NBA betting side centered on information before it became public. In modern sports betting, a star sitting out, a player leaving early, or a rotation change can move a line fast. The most valuable moment is not after the information becomes public. The valuable moment is before the sportsbook adjusts. A player prop bet, especially an under on points, rebounds, assists, or total production, can become extremely profitable if a bettor already knows the player will not play normal minutes. That is why injury reports, minute limits, rest plans, and medical status carry financial value. They are not just team information. In a legal betting economy, they are market-moving intelligence. The Terry Rozier allegation became one of the most important teaching examples in the case. Prosecutors alleged that on March 23, 2023, Rozier was playing for the Charlotte Hornets and gave a longtime friend advance notice that he planned to leave a game early, using a lower leg injury as the explanation. Bettors then placed large wagers on his underperformance before the game unfolded. Rozier exited after roughly 9 minutes. The betting angle was not that someone guessed correctly. The allegation was that the result was known in advance by people who were allowed to bet before the market could respond. Later reporting in 2026 added that prosecutors accused Rozier of taking a bribe tied to the early exit, while Rozier has denied the charges and challenged the government's theory. Damon Jones occupies a different place in the story, and his role is central for teaching the full structure. Jones had NBA status as a former player and later as a coach. Prosecutors said he used private basketball access to distribute confidential information through a betting network. They also said he was involved in the rigged poker side, where celebrity status helped bring victims to games. In April 2026, Jones pleaded guilty to 2 counts of wire fraud conspiracy in 2 separate cases. That plea gave the public a clearer view of the bridge between the 2 worlds. One lane used NBA access to attack sportsbooks, while the other used NBA fame to bring wealthy victims into illegal poker rooms. The sports betting lane also reached beyond one game. Prosecutors described a broader period from late 2022 into March 2024, with alleged misuse of non-public information about upcoming NBA games. The case included alleged tips about lineup decisions, pre-release medical information, and planned early exits. It also touched the earlier Jontay Porter matter, where Porter had already pleaded guilty in a related betting scheme after leaving games early so others could profit from underperformance wagers. This is important for the audience to understand. The issue was not one strange box score. It was a system of people trying to convert inside knowledge into betting profits before the public, sportsbooks, and league officials could react. The poker side had a different structure, but the same central idea. The victim believed the contest was fair. Prosecutors alleged that beginning as early as 2019, underground Texas Hold'em games were secretly rigged across New York and other locations. These games were not ordinary private card games where experienced gamblers took their chances. They were allegedly controlled environments. The victims sat down believing they were playing poker against other players. According to prosecutors, they were actually facing organizers, cheating teams, hidden technology, off-site operators, and organized crime protection. The table looked like a game. The structure behind the table functioned like a fraud operation. The term face card is one of the most useful ways to teach the poker scheme. A face card was a recognizable athlete or former professional figure brought into the room to make the game feel attractive, exclusive, and credible. A wealthy player might not attend an underground game with unknown hustlers, but he might attend if he believed he could play beside a famous NBA figure. That celebrity presence created comfort. It lowered suspicion. It made the room feel like a special invitation instead of a trap. Prosecutors alleged that former professional athletes were used in that way, with Billups and Jones named in the poker case. Billups has pleaded not guilty and denied the allegations through counsel. The cheating technology gave the alleged poker empire its modern character. Prosecutors described altered shuffling machines that could read every card in the deck and determine which player would receive the winning hand. That information could then be transmitted away from the table, sent back to a player inside the game, and signaled through pre-arranged movements. The alleged table team included a quarterback, or driver, whose job was to receive the information and communicate it to other conspirators without alerting the victim. To the victim, it looked like cards, chips, conversation, and normal poker decisions. To the cheating team, it was controlled information moving through a hidden command system. The operation allegedly used more than one kind of cheating device. Prosecutors described chip tray analyzers with hidden cameras, X-ray tables able to read face-down cards, and special lenses or glasses used with marked cards. This is where the story moves beyond the old image of a crooked dealer or a marked deck kept in a drawer. The modern rigged game could combine wireless transmission, electronic reading, body signals, and off-site coordination. The poker room became a controlled environment. The real contest was not between players. The real contest was between the victim's trust and the cheating team's information advantage. The Mafia role was not just a decorative detail. Prosecutors alleged that members and associates of the Bonanno, Gambino, and Genovese families backed games, received a share of proceeds, and used the old tools of organized crime when money was owed. This is where the modern and traditional worlds met. The technology could read cards, but organized crime could provide reputation, territory, enforcement, access, and collection pressure. A rigged shuffler could help win the money. A mafia-backed structure could help collect it. That combination made the alleged operation more dangerous than a private gambling hustle. The New York games described by prosecutors included a Lexington Avenue game tied to Bonanno interests and a Washington Place game tied to Gambino interests, with Genovese involvement also alleged. For a period in 2023, prosecutors said the two games merged and all three families received proceeds from the rigged and illegal poker activity. This part teaches an important point about modern organized crime. Families can compete, but they can also cooperate when a revenue stream is large enough. Gambling has always been one of the classic mafia industries, and the legal spread of sports betting did not remove illegal gambling from the underworld. It gave illegal operators new markets, new language, and new targets. The alleged poker empire also shows how organized crime adapts to class and setting. This was not a backroom game for small local bettors, losing a few $100s. Prosecutors described victims losing tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars at a time. The locations included high-status markets and private settings where money, ego, access, and celebrity could mix. A wealthy player entering that room might think he was gaining entry into an elite circle. In the government's version of the case, that belief was the opening weakness. The guest was not entering a fair high-stakes game. He was entering a room where several people around him already knew how the cards were going to fall. Debt collection gave the case its older mafia edge. Prosecutors alleged that when people did not pay, members of the conspiracy used threats, intimidation, assault, robbery, and extortion. The case included allegations of debt-related violence and even a gunpoint robbery involving a rigged shuffler machine. That detail is important. The technology may look new, but the enforcement logic is old. A cheating device can create the debt. Organized crime pressure can turn that debt into payment. The operation, therefore, contained two layers: the fraud that produced the losses, and the intimidation structure that protected the money after the losses were created. Money movement formed another part of the system. Prosecutors alleged that victims were sometimes directed to send bank wires to shell companies, after which money could be moved back to game organizers in cash or cryptocurrency, minus laundering fees. This is the modern financial skin of an old gambling racket. The cash does not always pass across a card table anymore. It can move through accounts, business fronts, digital assets, intermediaries, and fee takers. The purpose remains recognizable: separate the money from the visible fraud, disguise who received it, and keep the engine running. Chauncey Billup's public profile made the poker case explode in attention. He was not just a former player, he was an NBA champion, Finals MVP, Hall of Fame figure, and head coach of the Portland Trail Blazers. Prosecutors alleged he served as one of the celebrity draws in the rigged game structure and received a share of proceeds. Billups pleaded not guilty. For the audience, the teaching point is not to declare guilt before trial. The teaching point is to understand why his name changed the scale of public reaction. When a Hall of Fame NBA figure appears in a Mafia-linked gambling indictment, the story leaves the crime pages and enters the center of sports integrity. Rozier's Lane created a different kind of damage. A rigged poker game harms victims sitting at the table. A corrupted sports betting scheme threatens the trust surrounding the contest itself. Fans do not just watch a game for entertainment. Bettors, sportsbooks, teams, leagues, broadcasters, and sponsors now operate around the assumption that the game is being played honestly. If a player can secretly alter availability or performance for a betting edge, every unusual injury exit becomes suspicious. Every late scratch becomes a betting question. Every strange prop result becomes part of the public imagination. That is why the league integrity issue is so large. The NBA's modern dilemma is tied to the explosion of legal sports betting. Leagues once kept gambling at a public distance. Now betting lines appear inside broadcasts, phone apps, sponsorship campaigns, studio shows, and fan conversations. This creates revenue, engagement, and constant attention. It also creates pressure on every piece of private information inside a team building. A trainer's update, a coach's private plan, a player's pain level, or a locker room comment can become financially valuable. The old illegal bookmaker wanted action. The modern betting ecosystem creates markets around every rebound, assist, point total, rotation choice, and injury report. The alleged conspirators understood the value of timing. Once a lineup change becomes public, the advantage shrinks. Once the sportsbook adjusts a line, the easy profit disappears. The dangerous window is the private period before the adjustment. That is why inside information is so valuable and why straw bettors can matter. If the same people connected to the source keep betting directly, the pattern can expose them quickly. A network spreads the action through different accounts, locations, and names. The aim is to hide the source of the information while extracting money from the market. The poker empire used a similar timing principle, but inside the game itself. The cheating team did not need to control every card by magic. It needed to know enough before the victim made decisions. Poker is built around incomplete information. A player bets, folds, calls, or raises without knowing exactly what others hold. If one side secretly knows the best hand, the whole game is broken. The victim may still feel responsible for losing. He may think he misread the table, chased the wrong hand, or ran into bad luck. That uncertainty is useful to the fraud. It delays suspicion and keeps the victim at the table longer. This case also shows why gambling remains one of the Mafia's most durable businesses. Narcotics brings heavy law enforcement pressure and long sentences. Labor racketeering requires control of unions, industries, and institutions. Gambling survives across eras because demand never disappears. People want games, risk, credit, quick money, status rooms, private action, and the feeling of access. Organized crime can provide illegal games, collect debts, arrange credit, protect operators, intimidate non-payers, and take a percentage without always appearing as the visible host. In this case, prosecutors described an alleged revenue pipeline where illegal poker money helped enrich organized crime families. The old Mafia bookmaker and the modern betting app now exist in the same gambling universe. One is illegal and one is regulated, but both depend on lines, information, and money flow. Illegal operators can exploit legal markets by feeding inside information into them. They can also use the cultural normalization of betting to make gambling conversations feel ordinary. When every fan talks about spreads and props, the line between casual betting talk and profitable inside information can become easier for corrupt actors to cross. That is why the modern mafia does not need to invent gambling culture. It can attach itself to gambling culture already surrounding professional sports. The law enforcement response also followed modern organized crime logic. Investigators were not only looking at one bad bet or one strange poker night. They followed money, communications, game organizers, alleged technology suppliers, debt collectors, athletes, coaches, bettors, and mafia-linked participants. The poker case named more than 30 defendants. The sports betting case named 6 defendants at first, and later continued moving through guilty pleas and new charges. Damon Jones' guilty plea became a major confirmation point for prosecutors, while Rosier and Billups remain in contested legal positions. By 2021, the Colombo crime family was moving with enough confidence to aim at something older. New York mobsters always wanted steady labor money, steady vendor money, and a health fund that could be bent from the inside. Federal prosecutors said the family's leadership and its working crew had spent years trying to infiltrate a Queens-based labor union and its affiliated health fund through extortion, money laundering, fraud, loan sharking, and side schemes tied to workplace safety certifications. When the indictment was unsealed in Brooklyn in September 2021, it did not name one captain or one rogue crew. It named the whole visible command structure: boss Andrew Mush Russo, underboss Benjamin Benji Castellazzo, consigliere Ralph Di Matteo, captains Theodore Persico Jr., Richard Ferrara and Vincent Ricciardo, soldier Michael Uvino, and multiple associates. That alone told the story. This was not a loose street scam. It was a family operation. The center of the case was a union official who had been under pressure for years. Prosecutors said the squeeze began back in 2001, when Vinny Unions Ricciardo started forcing that official to hand over part of his salary under the false claim that some kind of pension payment was owed. Over time, the pressure widened. According to the Department of Justice, the leadership then pushed not just for money out of the official's pocket, but for control over decisions inside the union and its health fund, including attempts to steer contracts toward vendors connected to the family. Prosecutors said the administration wanted to pull more than $10,000 a month out of the health fund. That is where the comeback sits. It was not built around headlines or public swagger. It was built around taking hold of an institution that already had money flowing through it every month. Andrew Russo stood over this phase of the family as the boss named in the case. He was not a new face. By the time of the 2021 indictment, AP noted he had already done federal time in an earlier racketeering case and still returned to the top of the family's leadership. Under him stood Castellazzo and Di Matteo, then the captains Persico, Ferrara, and Ricciardo, men prosecutors said helped apply pressure and direct the union play. Federal prosecutors were not describing an old shell of a family living off its name. They were describing a command structure that still knew how to divide labor, assign pressure, and chase money through legitimate channels. Russo died while the case was still moving, but the rest of the administration was left in place to answer for the operation in court. Vinnie Unions gave the case its hardest edge. Prosecutors said he was one of the main enforcers in the labor union scheme, and that he did not talk like a man trying to hide the threat. In one recorded conversation described by the DOJ and AP, he made clear that the union official obeyed him out of fear, and the language prosecutors quoted was direct enough to show how the racket actually functioned. This was not persuasion. It was pressure tied to the possibility of murder in front of the victim's family. The image people sometimes carry of 21st century mob cases is that they are all bookkeeping, healthcare paper, and coded talk. Ricciardo's role cuts through that. The money came through contracts and benefits, but the engine under it was still fear. The health fund side made the case broader than a single extortion story. Prosecutors said Castellazzo, Di Matteo, Persico, Ferrara, Ricciardo, and Uvino worked with benefit brokers and providers, including Albert Alamena, Joseph Bellantoni, and Aaron Tompkins, to move money through vendor contracts and rebid jobs in ways that favored people tied to the family. According to the Department of Justice, the target list included claims administration, pharmaceuticals, and other health services, with efforts to install a company run by Alamena as the fund's third-party administrator. The family was not just trying to take cash off the street, it was trying to sit over a benefit structure and make the structure itself pay. There was a second lane in the case that widened the picture even more. Bonanno soldier John Regano, known as Bazoo and the Maniac, was charged in a separate but connected scheme involving fraudulent workplace safety certifications through 2 occupational safety schools on Long Island. Prosecutors said the schools did not actually provide the required OSHA training to hundreds of workers. Instead, false paperwork was submitted to government agencies, and the same facilities were used for mob meetings and to store illegal drugs and fireworks. Domenic Ricciardo and John Glover were tied to that lane, and DOJ said Vinnie Unions plotted to funnel union workers into those schools for fake certifications. So the case was not just about a union official getting squeezed. It was also about using the labor world to feed other rackets. The government's 2021 takedown was unusually broad. The DOJ described the case as a long-running effort to infiltrate and take control of the union and its health fund, while also charging loan sharking, marijuana trafficking, workplace safety fraud, and money laundering conspiracy. One defendant, John Regano, was also accused of drug trafficking and fraud offenses connected to that fake certification lane. Another part of the indictment said Ricciardo, Uvino, Regano, and Thomas Costa had participated in extortionate loans totaling $250,000 at a weekly interest rate that did not reduce principal, the kind of loan structure built to keep a victim trapped. The government was not claiming one single union shakedown. It was presenting a criminal system with labor money at the center and other rackets attached to it. Then came the collapse in court. By July 2023, the Department of Justice announced that all 14 defendants charged in the 2021 and 2022 Colombo-related cases had pleaded guilty to various felony charges. Ricciardo was the last to plead. Before him, Castellazzo had pleaded guilty to money laundering conspiracy, De Matteo to racketeering involving extortion and money laundering conspiracy, and Persico and Ferrara to racketeering. Uvino, Thomas Costa, and Domenic Ricciardo had also been convicted or pleaded guilty on racketeering-related charges, while the benefit fund figures took healthcare fraud pleas. The office said there could be no doubt the family had been cut down through the guilty pleas of its leadership and facilitators. That was the public language. The street translation was simpler. The family overreached, and the whole top layer was now walking into court one by one. Theodore Persico Jr. was one of the most important names in that wave. DOJ said the government viewed him as the man slated to become the family's next boss. His plea and sentence turned him from heir apparent into another federal inmate. By the February 2024 DOJ update, Persico had been sentenced to 60 months in prison and ordered to pay restitution. That is a major turning point in the case. A family can survive a captain getting hit. It can survive an old boss going down. A family has a harder time moving cleanly when the man expected to take the next seat also gets buried in the same prosecution. The other sentences filled in the picture of how complete the damage was. Castellazzo got 15 months after pleading guilty to money laundering conspiracy. Di Matteo got 36 months and restitution. Soldier Michael Uvino got 41 months, forfeiture, and restitution. Domenic Ricciardo got 28 months and forfeiture. Regano got 57 months and a $500,000 forfeiture order. Alamena and Bellantoni received probation and fines after their healthcare fraud pleas. Then in February 2024, Vinnie Unions himself was sentenced to 51 months, $350,000 in forfeiture, and $280,890 in restitution. As of that DOJ update, 4 defendants, including Richard Ferrara and Thomas Costa, still awaited sentencing in the case. What gives this whole story weight is the mix of old Mafia methods and newer targets. The old methods are obvious: threats, kick-ups, loyalty to the hierarchy, pressure on a victim who knows resistance can bring violence. The newer target was not a union hall in the old romanticized sense. It was a labor union tied to a health fund outside vendors, benefits administration, and workplace safety paperwork. That is how the Colombo family tried to make itself relevant in the 21st century. It did not need to own the street corner in public. It needed to control a money channel that already looked legitimate from the outside. So the comeback did happen, but it did not end in a restored dynasty. It ended in indictments, guilty pleas, and prison terms across the administration and its surrounding circle. The family still showed the instincts that had kept organized crime alive for generations: find the institution, get inside it, place pressure where fear will hold, and turn benefits and contracts into private revenue. Federal prosecutors answered by taking the structure apart from the top down. By the time the plea wave was complete, the public story was no longer about whether the Colombo family could still reach into labor. It was about how far it had gone before the case closed over it. You're watching the Everything Network. Sylvester Zottola's murder looked at first like an old New York Mafia execution. A 71-year-old Bronx businessman, long reported as a Bonanno-connected figure, was shot dead in a McDonald's drive-thru on Webster Avenue on October 4th, 2018. He had survived threats, a home invasion, a knife attack, and months of stalking. His son Salvatore had also been shot and nearly killed. The violence had the shape of an underworld message, but the truth that came forward in federal court was more personal, more bitter, and more modern. The murder was not ordered by a rival family. Prosecutors proved it was ordered by Sylvester's own son, Anthony Zottola. The case sits at the crossing point of 3 worlds: old Mafia money, Bronx real estate, and hired street violence. Sylvester Zottola, known as Sally Daz, had been reported for years as an associate of the Bonanno crime family, with ties to Vincent Vinnie Gorgeous Basciano. His older reputation came from the gambling machine world, especially joker poker machines placed in restaurants and social clubs. But by the time of his death, the clearest money target was his real estate empire. Federal prosecutors said Sylvester controlled a residential portfolio of multifamily rental properties worth tens of millions of dollars. That portfolio made the murder more than a family dispute. It was a succession war inside a private fortune. Anthony Zottola helped manage the properties, collected rent, maintained buildings, and helped run A&S Maintenance, a company he jointly owned with his brother Salvatore. He was already inside the family business. He knew the properties. He knew the cash flow. He knew the people around his father. The government's case showed a son who did not want to inherit slowly. He wanted control, and he turned that desire into a murder-for-hire conspiracy. The old Mafia shadow gave investigators an early theory. Sylvester's history made it reasonable to ask whether an organized crime figure wanted him dead. He had lived near the Bonanno world. He had operated gambling machines. His past included contact with powerful names. In New York, those facts carry weight. When a man with that background is hunted across months and finally executed in public, the first question naturally points toward the 5 families. But the federal record moved in a different direction. The violence did not come from a Bonanno order. It came from within the Zottola family itself, pushed outward through a hired chain. Anthony Zottola hired Bushorn Shelton, a leader tied to the Bloods, to arrange the killings of Sylvester and Salvatore. Shelton then recruited others. The work was outsourced through a crew of hitmen, drivers, trackers, and shooters. The old Mafia world was in the background. The killing machine was a modern murder-for-hire network. The attacks began before the public killing. On November 26, 2017, Sylvester was menaced at gunpoint by a masked individual. That was an early warning, though he did not yet know who stood behind it. A month later, on December 27th, 3 men invaded his home. They struck him in the head with a gun, stabbed him repeatedly, and slashed his throat. He survived. At his age, surviving that kind of attack was almost impossible to process as random violence. Someone wanted him dead, and the attempts were not stopping. The home attack revealed the cruelty of the conspiracy. Sylvester was not a young target in a street dispute. He was an elderly man attacked inside his own residence. The attackers did not merely threaten him. They beat him, stabbed him, cut his throat, and left him alive by chance. After that, he had to keep living with the knowledge that someone had entered his house and tried to end him. What he did not know was that the person behind the attacks shared his own blood. The next major strike came against Salvatore Zottola. On July 11, 2018, a gunman shot Salvatore in the head, chest, and hand outside his residence. He survived, badly wounded. Salvatore's survival kept the full family business target visible. This was not only about removing Sylvester. Anthony also wanted his brother gone. In the government's account, the murder plan aimed at both the father and the brother, clearing the path toward control of the business. The attacks kept failing, but the conspiracy did not stop. Each survival gave Anthony another chance to abandon the plan. He did not. The pressure continued, and the plot became more organized. The conspirators placed a tracking device on Sylvester's car. That device changed the final attack from stalking by chance into targeted surveillance. It allowed the shooter to find Sylvester at a precise moment, away from home, moving through an ordinary part of his day. On October 4, 2018, Sylvester Zottola drove to a McDonald's on Webster Avenue in the Bronx. He waited in the drive-thru to pick up coffee. It was a small routine, the kind of moment that should have meant nothing beyond an elderly man moving through his morning. He-Man Ross tracked him there. Ross approached and fired multiple shots, killing Sylvester in his vehicle. The public location made the killing feel even colder. The plot had followed him into one of the most ordinary spaces in the city and ended his life there. The drive-thru murder became one of the most memorable New York underworld killings of the modern period. Not due to a boss title, not due to a family war. It stood out through contrast. A man linked in public memory to the Bonanno world was not killed in a classic mafia dispute. He was killed through a contract arranged by his son, using a street gang-linked crew, over control of real estate and money. The old underworld supplied the image. The evidence supplied the betrayal. The text messages after the killing became central to the case. Ross and Shelton exchanged messages after the hit. Shelton then contacted Anthony Zottola and informed him that his father had been murdered. Shelton asked, "Can we party today or tomorrow?" Anthony answered with coded payment language, saying he would have the cases of water ready soon. Investigators later recovered a photograph from one of Shelton's phones showing bottled water and more than $200,000 in banded cash. That coded phrase became one of the case's defining details. It reduced a father's murder to payment logistics. It showed the business-like tone of the conspiracy after the killing was complete. Sylvester was dead. Salvatore had survived a shooting. Anthony's response was not shock, grief, or horror. In the government's proof, it was payment language. The son who appeared as a family member in public was moving money behind the murder. The investigation pulled the conspiracy apart through modern evidence: text messages, cell phones, tracking device data, surveillance, cooperating witnesses, financial records, and forensic work all helped reveal the chain. The device on Sylvester's car showed coordination. The communications showed planning and aftermath. The payment evidence showed motive and completion. The case did not rely only on underworld rumor. It was built through digital trails and courtroom proof. Anthony Zottola's defense tried to point toward old Mafia explanations and third-party blame. That made sense as a trial strategy. Sylvester's background gave room for suspicion. A man with reported Bonanno ties, gambling machine history, and possible protection payment issues could have enemies. But prosecutors persuaded the jury that the true conspiracy came from Anthony, Shelton, Ross, and the recruited crew. The Mafia shadow was real enough to confuse the first view of the killing, but it did not save Anthony in court. The trial lasted 6 weeks. In October of 2022, a federal jury in Brooklyn convicted Anthony Zottola Sr. and Heman Ross of murder-for-hire conspiracy, murder-for-hire, firearms offenses, and causing Sylvester Zottola's death through the use of a firearm. A third defendant, Alfred Lopez, was acquitted. The verdict drew a clear legal line. Anthony was not merely accused of being near the family business or connected to suspicious people. He was found guilty of hiring men to kill his father and brother. In April of 2023, Anthony Zottola and Heman Ross were sentenced to mandatory life imprisonment, plus 112 years. The extra years carried symbolic force: 41 years for Salvatore's age when he was shot, and 71 years for Sylvester's age when he was killed. The sentence reflected both victims. One survived the assassination attempt, one did not. The court punished the murder and the attempted destruction of the brother. Bushorn Shelton, the man who organized the hired violence after Anthony brought him into the plot, received 37 years in prison in June of 2023. Shelton had pleaded guilty to murder-for-hire and murder-for-hire conspiracy. Other co-defendants had already pleaded guilty and received long prison terms ranging from 16 to 22 years. The conspiracy did not end with one shooter. It required recruitment, surveillance, attempted attacks, payment movement, and repeated efforts to finish the job after earlier failures. Heman Ross carried the trigger role in the final murder and the attack on Salvatore. Prosecutors said Ross shot both victims, Salvatore in July and Sylvester in October. His position in the case shows how murder for hire can separate motive from action. Anthony supplied the motive, Shelton supplied the organizing layer, Ross supplied the final violence. Each man occupied a different part of the chain. Together, they turned inheritance greed into a year-long campaign of murder attempts. Salvatore's survival is one of the most important human parts of the story. He was not only a witness to his father's death, he was also a target. He had been shot in front of his home and lived through wounds to his head, chest, and hand. He then had to face the truth that his own brother had plotted against him and their father. The case was not only patricide, it was a family purge aimed at business control. The real estate empire gives this case its modern economic shape. Many mafia-linked stories revolve around gambling, unions, narcotics, loans, and construction. The Zottola case revolved around property. Multi-family rental buildings created long-term cash flow, inheritance value, leverage, and control. Real estate can be less visible than street rackets and more durable than fast, illegal money. Whoever controlled the portfolio controlled a fortune. Prosecutors said Anthony wanted that control badly enough to eliminate the people ahead of him. Sylvester's older gambling machine world also adds depth. Joker poker machines were part of a Bronx underworld economy where restaurants, social clubs, and cash businesses could carry illegal gambling streams. Reported ties to the Bonanno family placed Sylvester in an older world of machine routes, protection, and neighborhood influence. By the late 2010s, that world had changed. Old bosses were dead or imprisoned. Crews had shifted. Street gangs, Russian-speaking networks, Albanian groups, and other criminal actors had entered spaces once dominated by Italian organized crime. The Zottola case shows that transition in brutal form. The murder was not a clean mafia succession. It was not a sanctioned family hit. It was a private family betrayal using available street violence. That distinction is central to the modern meaning of the case. Organized crime in New York had become more fragmented, more hybrid, and less dependent on one formal hierarchy. A man with an old Bonanno-linked background could be targeted through a Bloods-connected murder crew hired by his own son. That would have seemed almost unthinkable in an earlier era when formal mafia protection carried stronger force. The case also shows how the mafia myth collapses under family greed. The language of honor, loyalty, and blood has always been part of the public image surrounding organized crime. The Zottola case cut through it. Anthony did not protect his father. He paid men to hunt him. He did not protect his brother. He tried to have him killed. The family business was not a bond. It became the prize. The repeated failed attempts make the story even darker. Anthony had time. After the gunpoint threat, he had time. After the home invasion and throat slashing, he had time. After Salvatore was shot and survived, he had time. Each stage created another opportunity to stop. The conspiracy continued until Sylvester was dead. That slow persistence gave prosecutors one of their strongest moral arguments at sentencing. This was not one sudden violent act. It was a campaign. The final murder also changed how investigators understood the earlier attacks. What could first appear as disconnected violence became a pattern. Menace, home invasion, stabbing, attempted shooting, attack on Salvatore, tracking device, drive-through execution. Once Anthony's role became clear, the whole year came into focus. The violence was not random escalation. It was repeated failure followed by adjustment. The courtroom record also carried a later appellate chapter. In November of 2025, the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit affirmed the convictions and life sentences of Anthony Zottola and Hyman Ross. Anthony then pursued Supreme Court review, challenging issues including evidentiary rulings and the anonymous jury. Those later filings kept the case alive legally, but the central verdict remained in place. The federal system had already answered the main question. Anthony Zottola hired men to kill his father and brother to take control of the family business. The Bronx setting gives the case its local force. This was not a distant criminal operation hidden from everyday life. The attacks moved through residences, streets, a family compound, vehicles, and a fast food drive-through. The places were ordinary. The violence was not. That contrast is one reason the case stayed in public memory. A murder-for-hire plot built around real estate and family betrayal ended in a place where any New Yorker might stop for coffee. The Bonanno connection should be handled with precision. Sylvester was widely reported as a Bonanno associate and as someone close to Basciano's circle, but the murder itself was not proved as a Bonanno-ordered killing. That is what makes the case stronger, not weaker. It begins with the look of a mafia assassination and ends with the revelation that the threat came from inside the victim's own family. The old mafia angle is the doorway, The son's betrayal is the room. The Zottola case belongs in the modern Mafia series, even though the final conspiracy was not a traditional family war. It reveals what remained around the edges of the older underworld. Gambling machine history, Bonanno-linked reputation, real estate wealth, private security fears, street gang violence, and federal organized crime prosecutors handling the case. It shows the old world bleeding into the new one. The names and neighborhoods came from one era. The phones, trackers, outsourced shooters, and digital evidence came from another. The full meaning is harsh. Sylvester Zottola survived old criminal circles, aging underworld ties, and years of dangerous associations, only to be destroyed by his own son's greed. The fortune he built became the motive. The family business became the target. The brother became an obstacle. The father became a contract. In the end, the most dangerous person near Sylvester was not a rival boss, not a forgotten enemy, and not a stranger from the old Bonanno world. It was the son already standing close enough to know exactly what killing him could unlock. The final picture is the Bronx in a modern underworld transition. An elderly man with an old Mafia-linked past, a valuable real estate portfolio, a son inside the business, a brother nearly killed, a hired Bloods-connected crew, a tracking device hidden on a car, a public murder in a drive-thru. Then the courtroom. Life sentences, guilty pleas, digital proof, and the old theory of a Mafia hit replaced by something colder. The Zottola murder-for-hire case is not only a crime story. It is a study of inheritance, weakened protection, family betrayal, and the way modern New York violence can pass through old Mafia shadows without being controlled by them. Public reporting on the 2025 Rosario trial described it as a turf war or mini-mob war between Bonanno and Genovese interests, but the record that surfaced in court was built around gambling rooms, cash flow, extortion threats, and a corrupted detective trying to tilt the board for one side. It shows how the Mafia still fights when the goal is steady money and controlled territory, not newspaper headlines from bodies in the street. The center of the story was not a social club in Old Brooklyn. It was a coffee bar in Lynbrook. Federal prosecutors said that beginning in at least May 2012, the Bonanno and Genovese families jointly operated an illegal gambling parlor inside the Grand Café in Lynbrook, Long Island. That arrangement was not random. On the Genovese side, prosecutors said Carmelo Polito and Joseph Joe Fish Macario represented their family. On the Bonanno side, Little Anthony Pipitone represented his. They worked out a profit split so both families could earn from the same room. That is the first important point. This story did not begin with open war. It began with business. Prosecutors said the Genovese side also operated illegal gambling parlors out of Sal's shoe repair in Merrick and the Centro Calcio Italiano club in West Babylon. Salvatore, Sal the Showmaker Rubino, and Joseph, Joe Box Rutigliano, collected proceeds and moved money up to higher-ranking Genovese figures, including Polito and Macario. Rubino later admitted in federal court that he ran card games and illegal gambling machines out of his shoe shop for the Genovese family. The whole thing was hidden inside ordinary suburban storefronts that looked harmless from the sidewalk. The Bonanno side had its own rooms and its own structure. Prosecutors said Anthony Pipitone, his brother Vito Pipitone, and associate Agostino Gabriele operated illegal gambling parlors through locations called the Soccer Club in Valley Stream, La Nazionale Soccer Club in Queens, and Glendale Sports Club in Queens. Gabriele was described as one of the men who collected proceeds for the Bonannos and moved money upward to the Pipitone side. So even while the Grand Café was a joint operation, the broader business was divided by family, by room, and by who controlled the take. That arrangement could function for years. It could also turn dangerous very quickly once one side decided it wanted more than its own share. The violence in this story did not begin with a shooting. It began with threats. Polito was later convicted and sentenced not only for his part in the Grand Café operation, but for attempted extortion tied to a separate online sportsbook called PGW Lines. Federal prosecutors said he threatened a debtor with serious violence, first saying the man's face would be broken, and then sending word that he would be put under a bridge. That language tells you what kind of atmosphere sat behind these gambling rooms. They were not harmless backroom card games. They were revenue streams protected by men who were willing to threaten hard violence when money stopped moving. By the time the public got a full look at the feud, the Bonanno side had found an advantage that no ordinary bookmaker could match. Prosecutors said Nassau County Detective Hector Rosario was being paid by the Bonanno family to protect its gambling operations and shut down rival locations. The government said he warned a Bonanno associate that he was under investigation, looked up the home address of a possible witness he believed was cooperating, and accepted money in exchange for helping the Bonanno side. In plain terms, one side in the feud had bought access to a badge. That changed the whole story. It was no longer one criminal group leaning on another. It was a criminal group trying to use law enforcement itself as a weapon. The most vivid part of that corruption story was the fake raid. Trial reporting in 2025 said Rosario helped stage at least one sham police raid on a Genovese gambling location, specifically Sal's Shoe Repair. Prosecutors said the point was to scare the rival side and damage its business. Public reporting from the trial described the raid as so weak and unconvincing that the men inside realized it was not a real bust. That detail fits the whole case. This was not polished power. It was a live mob feud playing out through backrooms, damaged machines, tip-offs, and improvised intimidation. Even when the tactic looked sloppy, the intention behind it was serious. One side wanted the other side squeezed. There was another layer to the Rosario story. According to trial reporting, he also tried to steer authorities toward rival rooms by feeding inside information to law enforcement without honestly explaining where it came from. One report said he gave Nassau prosecutors the password and internal details needed to access the illegal casino hidden inside the Grand Café. The goal was not simply to protect Bonanno gambling rooms from the police. The goal was to help the police hit the other side. That is a more modern mafia fight. The pressure comes through information, access, and selective enforcement, with men in the background trying to bend institutions instead of only pulling triggers. Federal prosecutors finally broke the whole structure open in August 2022, when 2 indictments in Brooklyn charged 9 defendants with racketeering, illegal gambling, money laundering, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and related offenses. The named racketeering defendants were Anthony Pipitone, Vito Pipitone, Agostino Gabriella, Carmelo Polito, Joseph Macario, Salvatore Rubino, and Joseph Rutigliano. Rosario was charged separately with obstruction and lying to the FBI. The public list of locations made the story even more specific. Grand Café in Limbrook, Soccer Club in Valley Stream, Sal's Shoe Repair in Merrick, Centro Calcio Italiano Club in West Babylon, and the Queens-based sports and soccer clubs tied to the Bonanno side. By then, the feud had moved from whispers and staged raids into federal court. The first real collapse in court came on the Genovese side. In April 2024, the Justice Department announced that 5 Genovese members and associates had pleaded guilty. Polito pleaded guilty to racketeering involving illegal gambling and attempted extortion. Macario pleaded guilty to racketeering. Rutigliano and Mark Fua pleaded guilty to felony charges tied to the gambling businesses. Rubino pleaded guilty to operating an illegal gambling business for the Genovese family. That matters for the structure of the story. Once the case was public, the Genovese crime family began folding in court one by one. The backroom system that had run for years ended in a series of guilty pleas. Polito's sentencing in December 2024 gave the story a hard closing beat for one of the major players. He got 30 months in prison for racketeering tied to the Grand Café operation and the attempted extortion linked to PGW lines. The Justice Department said he had been surveilled distributing proceeds upward to higher-ranking members. That detail is important. The gambling rooms were not isolated hustles run by local bookmakers keeping everything for themselves. The money moved up the chain. The rooms existed to generate steady cash for larger family structures, and the men inside knew exactly where some of that money had to go. Then came the Rosario trial in 2025, and that is where the feud became a full documentary lane instead of just another gambling indictment. A jury convicted Rosario of making false statements to the FBI about his work for the Bonanno family, though it acquitted him on obstruction. The government's proof at trial, as summarized by the Department of Justice and trial reporting, was that he had lied when agents asked him about the Mafia, about illegal gambling spots, and about the Bonanno associate he had warned. The verdict did not validate every accusation the government made against him, but it did lock in the central disgrace. A Nassau detective had lied to cover up his mob work in the middle of a Long Island gambling feud. The names are what make the story stick. Little Anthony Pipitone on the Bonanno side, his brother Vito, Agostino Gabriella moving money, Carmelo Polito and Joe Fish Macario on the Genovese side, Joe Box Rutigliano and Sal the Shoemaker Rubino handling rooms and proceeds, Mark Fewer in the online betting lane, Damiano Zumo later appearing as a cooperating witness, Hector Rosario standing in the middle of it with a badge and a lie. None of them gave this story the broad celebrity of a Gotti-era case. That is exactly why it works. It feels current, local, and real. It shows how the Mafia survives by shrinking into storefronts, club rooms, and side businesses, while still using the same old tools: tribute, threats, discipline, and corruption. The cleanest way to understand the Long Island Bonanno-Genovese casino feud is this. It was a mob fight built for the 21st century. No broad daylight war for the front page. No endless parade of funerals. The pressure came through gambling parlors hidden in ordinary businesses, through profit splits that created resentment, through extortion threats when bettors fell behind, and through a detective who tried to turn his office into a weapon for one side. When the case finally surfaced in court, the old Mafia pattern was still there in full. Make money quietly, kick it up, lean on debtors, hit rivals where they earn, use fear when cash alone is not enough. On Long Island, that pattern stayed alive far longer than most people around those storefronts probably understood. Adolfo Bruno was a serious man in a serious position, strong enough to control Western Massachusetts rackets of the Genovese crime family, but still beneath the New York administration that could make, break, or kill a man in that seat. By the early 2000s, Arthur Negro had risen to acting boss of the Genovese family, and federal prosecutors later said his reach extended from the Bronx into Springfield. That is how a parking lot murder in Massachusetts became a 5 families case in Manhattan federal court. The federal case later laid out Bruno's end in blunt terms. Prosecutors said Negro ordered Bruno killed in November 2003 to increase his own power and position in the family and to punish Bruno for speaking with the FBI. The men who handled the planning on the Springfield side, according to the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office, were Photios Freddie Gaius and his brother Ty Gaius, both Genovese associates in Springfield. The official line from the later conviction was that Negro gave the order. Freddie and Ty planned the hit, and a shooter was recruited to carry it out. Bruno was gunned down in Springfield on November 23, 2003. Years later, that killing was still sitting at the center of multiple racketeering trials, life sentences, and prison politics that would stretch all the way to Whitey Bulger's last day alive. The Bruno murder did not stand alone. Once federal prosecutors opened up the Springfield crew and the Negro case, the picture widened into the kind of violent internal file that only a five-families prosecution really captures. Negro, Photios, and Ty Gaius were also convicted for the November 2003 murder of Gary Westerman in Agawam, Massachusetts, after the government said they believed Westerman was cooperating with state police. They were also convicted in the attempted murder of Frank Dadabo in the Bronx, a shooting Negro ordered over a union-related dispute. On top of that came conspiracy counts tied to Luis Santos, who they believed was cooperating, and Giuseppe Manzi, described in the sentencing release as the leader of a rival criminal faction in Springfield. That is the proper frame for Bruno's story. It was not one isolated mob assassination. It was part of a broader Genovese campaign of internal control, retaliation, and rank building across New York and Massachusetts. Bruno's crew was local in geography, but New York in authority. Negro was the acting boss in New York. Bruno was the Springfield captain. The Gaius brothers were Springfield associates, doing work that prosecutors said served the wider family. The same indictment that carried Bruno's murder also carried extortion and other racketeering crimes in the Genovese structure. In other words, Springfield was not some independent New England sideshow. It was a functioning Massachusetts faction tied into a New York family command. Once Bruno was dead, the old arrangement was finished, and the government's later trials made clear that the fight over Springfield had been treated inside the family as a real power struggle, not a local misunderstanding. The convictions in 2011 closed the legal story for that phase with maximum force. Negro, Photios, and Ty were all sentenced to life in prison after being convicted of multiple murders, racketeering, extortion, attempted murder, murder conspiracies, and loan sharking. The sentencing release is clear on Bruno's place in the story. It identifies him as a captain in the Genovese family and says Negro ordered the hit to build his own power and punish Bruno for talking to the FBI. It says the Gaius brothers planned the murder and recruited the actual shooter. That sentence package effectively turned the Springfield internal war into a federal monument. Bruno was dead. Negro was buried in prison. The Gaius brothers were buried in prison. The New York leadership had lost one captain, and then lost some of the men who had removed him. Then the story sat for years in prison and waited for another body. James Whitey Bulger arrived at USP Hazleton in West Virginia on October 29, 2018, after a transfer from Florida. By the next morning, he was dead. Reuters reported that Bulger, already serving life after his 2013 conviction, was killed shortly after the transfer. The AP later reported that prosecutors said Photios and Paul DeCollegiero spent about 7 minutes in Bulger's cell, while Sean McKinnon moved away and then returned. Prosecutors also said inmate witnesses later described Bulger as a snitch, and one witness said DeCollegiero had announced that as soon as Bulger reached their unit, they planned to kill him. The prison killing was not random prison chaos. It was a targeted inmate execution, and the lead name in that execution was the same Photios who had already gone away for the Bruno murder. That is the Springfield Genovese link in its hardest form. Bulger did not get killed by some nameless inmate with no underworld history. He got killed by a man already serving life for the murder of Adolfo Bruno and Gary Westerman, a man Reuters described as an associate of the Genovese crime family. That gives the prison killing its full organized crime weight. Whitey had spent years as one of the most notorious informants in American mob history, an Irish gang leader who had fed the FBI while his own enemies were being crushed. Gaius had spent years inside the Genovese orbit, where informants and suspected informants had already turned up dead. Put those two histories in one prison unit, and the ending stops feeling accidental very quickly. The prison case eventually ended in pleas and sentences, rather than a murder trial. Reuters reported that in 2024, Gaius pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter after the government dropped more serious murder charges that could have brought life. He was sentenced to 25 years. Colombo, already serving a 25-year racketeering sentence from a Boston gang case, got another 51 months after pleading guilty to assault, resulting in serious bodily injury. McKinnon pleaded guilty to lying to federal agents and got time served. By then, the legal shape of the Bulger case was settled. Gaius was the principal killer in the government's account. Colombo was in the cell with him. McKinnon lied about what he knew. The case had started with murder charges in 2022 and ended with a three-man sequence of plea deals in 2024. There was another side to Bulger's death, and it had nothing to do with mob rank and everything to do with Bureau of Prisons failure. The DOJ Inspector General said in 2022 that Bulger's killing followed serious management and performance failures at multiple levels, bureaucratic incompetence, and flawed policies. The watchdog found no malicious intent by Bureau of Prisons employees, but it did find failures in communication, transfer processing, medical review, penref, and record handling. AP summarized the result even more plainly. Bulger was placed in general population at a violent prison after a transfer process so poor that the Inspector General said, "Public memory often freezes the Gambino family in older eras. Carlo Gambino, Paul Castellano, John Gotti, the Ravenite years, federal surveillance, televised trials, and the collapse of the old public image. But the modern Gambino story is not only a story of nostalgia, it is a story of survival under pressure. The family appears smaller than it looked in the old New York street war era, but smaller does not mean gone. In the modern period, the power is found in business pressure, union access, worksite influence, debt collection, illegal gambling, financial manipulation, and old relationships that still reach back across the Atlantic. The Gambino case tied to carting, demolition, and Sicilian links gives us one of the strongest modern examples. In November of 2023, federal prosecutors in Brooklyn unsealed a major indictment against members and associates of the Gambino organized crime family. The charges described racketeering conspiracy, extortion, witness retaliation, union-related crimes, fraud, theft, embezzlement, money laundering, assaults, arson, and efforts to infiltrate New York's carting and demolition industries. This was not a case built around one bar fight or one debt dispute. It was an industry control case. Carting and demolition are not side businesses in New York. They sit near the center of construction, real estate, sanitation, labor, and cash flow. Every major project creates debris. Every building teardown needs trucks. Every renovation needs containers, hauling, dumping, permits, labor coordination, and disposal routes. If a criminal organization can pressure carting companies, influence demolition bids, place people into union benefit systems, or intimidate competitors, it can reach the money before the public ever sees the finished building. That is why carting and demolition have always drawn organized crime attention. They connect the street to the job site. They connect labor to contractors. They connect legal companies to illegal payments. A construction project may look legitimate from the outside, but the hidden costs can include extortion payments, rigged bids, no-show jobs, threats against owners, and pressure on workers who know too much. The modern mafia does not need to own the entire project. It only needs a pressure point that forces money, influence, or silence. In this Gambino case, the key names formed a clear structure. Joseph Lanny, known as Joe Brooklyn and Momino, was identified as a Gambino captain. Diego Tantillo, Angelo Gradalone, and James Laforte were identified as Gambino soldiers. Vito Rappa was described as a US-based Sicilian mafia member and Gambino associate. Francesco Vaccari, known as Frank and Uncle Scicchio, was described as a US-based Sicilian mafia associate and Gambino associate. The case also included associates Salvatore Di Lorenzo, Robert Brooke, Kyle Johnson, and Vincent Minsquero. The ranks are important. A captain is not a loose street figure. A captain controls a crew, answers upward, and collects from people below. A soldier is an inducted member, a formal part of the family structure. Associates operate around them, earning, assisting, collecting, threatening, arranging business access, or handling practical work. The modern case therefore gives the audience a visible chain: captain, soldiers, Sicilian-linked figures, and associates working around industries that still produce steady money. The Sicilian connection gives this episode its deeper historical weight. The Gambino family has long carried a Sicilian identity within its American structure. The modern indictment did not present the family as an isolated New York group cut off from Palermo. It came as a coordinated US-Italian operation. On the same day federal authorities moved in New York, Italian law enforcement arrested organized crime members and associates in Sicily. Prosecutors in Brooklyn thanked law enforcement partners in Italy, including Palermo prosecutors, the Polizia di Stato, the Servizio Centrale Operativo, and the Squadra Mobile of Palermo. That transatlantic element changes the feel of the case. It means the Gambino family was not only surviving through old neighborhood reputation, it also retained relationships that American and Italian investigators viewed as active enough to require coordinated arrests. In modern mafia history, that connection is one of the reasons the Gambino family continues to draw attention. The American side may operate in New York, New Jersey, Staten Island, Brooklyn, Queens, and Long Island, but the Sicilian side remains part of the family's identity and its network of contacts. The alleged carting extortion was direct. Court filings described a New York area carting business owner who faced threats and violence tied to demands for payment. Prosecutors said the pressure included a bat threat, fire set to the steps of the owner's residence, attempts to damage carting trucks, and an assault on one of the owner's associates. This was industry pressure in personal form. The target was not only a business balance sheet. The pressure reached the home, the vehicles, the workers, and the people around the owner. The payment described in court filings was $4,000 to Francesco Vicari. On paper, that sum can look small compared with the reputation of the Gambino family. In practice, an extortion payment is not only about the first amount, it establishes obedience. It teaches the owner that refusal carries consequences. It sends a signal to other businesses in the same industry. It creates an opening for future payments, future demands, and future control. The first payment is often the proof that the pressure worked. The demolition side carried the same logic at a larger worksite level. Prosecutors described disputes involving a demolition company and alleged debts owed to Tantillo and a company cooperated by Tantillo and Brooke. Robert Brooke was later convicted of Hobbs Act extortion tied to this part of the case. Court records described a violent attack against one demolition company owner in Midtown Manhattan, followed by pressure placed on the owners to pay money and drop criminal charges. The owners later paid $50,000 to Tantillo and $40,000 to the company, cooperated by Tantillo and Brooke. Another demolition incident involved an employee of the same demolition company. Prosecutors said Tantillo and Kyle Johnson coordinated a violent hammer assault on that employee, leaving him seriously injured. Images of the injured employee were then circulated to people in the carting and demolition industries. That detail is important for teaching the method. The violence was not only punishment, it was communication to the market. It told other workers and owners what could happen when the wrong dispute reached the wrong people. The union and benefit plan allegations gave the case another layer. Court filings described no-show jobs and benefit schemes. Salvatore Di Lorenzo provided Rapper with a no-show job at a demolition company, allowing Rapper to receive paychecks and union health benefits. Tantillo and Johnson also worked to secure a no-show job for Johnson. A no-show job is one of the classic organized crime arrangements in labor racketeering. The person receives pay, benefits, or status without performing legitimate work. The company absorbs the cost. the union benefit system can be exploited. Legitimate workers lose trust in the system. Honest contractors face unfair pressure. The criminal organization gains money, insurance access, status, and leverage without having to run the job site openly. The allegations also reached bid rigging. Prosecutors described Tantillo, Di Lorenzo, and others conspiring to rig bids for demolition contracts in New York City. The filings included a Fifth Avenue project where companies allegedly exchanged bidding information. Bid rigging is not street theater. It is paperwork, corruption. It changes who wins contracts, how prices are set, and which companies survive. It can force honest operators out of a market, while criminally connected firms gain the advantage. This is where the modern Gambino story becomes more useful than the old public image. The case does not require a large public boss giving speeches. It shows a practical structure around work, debt, intimidation, union benefits, bids, and industry fear. That is modern mafia power at the business level. It does not need constant headlines. It needs owners who pay, workers who stay silent, companies that cooperate, and associates who know which pressure point to use. James Lafort added another enforcement dimension. In February of 2026, Lafort became the last of the 10 defendants to plead guilty or be convicted. He pleaded guilty to racketeering conspiracy, Hobbs Act extortion conspiracy, witness retaliation, and being a felon in possession of a firearm. His part of the case included extortion of a borrower, illegal poker and craps activity, and an assault connected to a debt dispute. The witness retaliation piece also carries old mafia weight. Court filings described an assault in February of 2021 against a person believed to have provided information to law enforcement. Laforte and Minsquero approached the man inside a restaurant. Laforte called him a rat and struck him. Lanny sat nearby. This part of the case moves beyond business infiltration and into one of the deepest organized crime rules. Silence must be enforced. Once a group loses the power to intimidate witnesses, its ability to control illegal business weakens fast. By October 17, 2025, 7 members and associates had pleaded guilty to racketeering conspiracy: Lanny, Tantillo, Gradalone, Rapper, Vicari, Johnson, and Minsquero. In August of 2025, Di Lorenzo pleaded guilty to theft from employee benefit plans. In December of 2025, Brooke was convicted at trial of Hobbs Act extortion. Then Laforte pleaded guilty on February 4, 2026. From the government's side, the case had moved from indictment to a complete row of guilty pleas and 1 trial conviction. For the audience, the strongest teaching point is that the Gambino family was not being portrayed as a museum piece. The case described current members and associates operating in live industries. It described Sicilian-linked figures working beside American Gambino members. It described business infiltration rather than only street crime. It described a crew structure using violence, fraud, union benefit access, bid manipulation, money movement, and retaliation to protect earning power. This is also why people remain fascinated by the Gambinos. The name carries history, but the modern cases show adaptation. The public remembers the old bosses, old trials, and old headlines. Federal cases keep bringing the family back in a new form: construction influence, illegal gambling, loan sharking, demolition, carting, union benefits, Sicilian ties, and coordination across neighborhoods and industries. The family name survives not only through legend. It survives through cases that show repeated attempts to find money inside the city's working systems. The modern family operates under more law enforcement pressure, with less public swagger and more risk. Yet, the court record still shows members and associates trying to claim pieces of profitable industries. The carting business gives us the street-facing side of the story. Trucks, containers, drivers, dispatchers, business owners, route access, damaged vehicles, and threats. The demolition business gives us the construction-facing side. Work sites, contracts, bids, laborers, benefit plans, no-show jobs, and payments. The Sicilian link gives us the old world connection. Palermo, American crews, shared identities, and and a coordinated takedown across 2 countries. The Gambino family's modern power should not be measured only by whether it controls all of New York the way older stories claim. It should be measured by whether members and associates still appear in industries with money, pressure, and fear. In this case, prosecutors said they did. They were not alleged to be chasing a symbolic title. They were accused of chasing revenue in the real economy, garbage hauling, demolition work, union benefit systems, illegal gambling, and debt collection. The best way to explain this to the audience is to follow the money from the street to the job site. A contractor needs demolition work. A demolition company needs labor and hauling. A carting company needs routes and trucks. A union benefit system handles health coverage and payments. A bid process determines who gets a project. Each step can be pressured. Each step can be turned into a payment point. Each step can produce fear when criminally connected people enter the process. This is the older Mafia business model in a modern city. It is not only about crime in hidden rooms. It is about legal industries forced to carry illegal costs. The legitimate owner pays twice, once to operate the business, and again to survive the pressure. The worker pays through corrupted benefits and a workplace shaped by fear. The public pays through distorted contracts, higher costs, and industries that become harder for honest companies to enter. The Gambino case also shows why law enforcement attacks these rackets through several agencies at once. The FBI brings organized crime investigations. The Department of Labor Inspector General follows union and benefit plan fraud. The New York City Business Integrity Commission watches industries such as carting and trade waste activity. The NYPD brings local criminal intelligence and street-level enforcement. Italian authorities follow the Sicilian side. One agency alone cannot see the whole structure. The money moves across business, labor, family rank, street enforcement, and international contacts. You're watching the Everything Network. Joe Legambi is an American mobster and former acting boss of the Philadelphia crime family. He is known among law enforcement circles to have a more old-school approach, in sharp contrast to boss Joey Molino's flamboyant, high-profile style. Legambi was credited by the Philadelphia Police Department's Criminal Intelligence Unit with quietly bringing stability back to the troubled Philadelphia South Jersey branch of the American Mafia during the 2000s. The New York Mafia families have been pleased with him and his approach, as well as his ability to turn the Philadelphia crime family back into a stable group. He was born on August 9, 1939, in South Philadelphia, one of 4 children born to Italian immigrant parents. His father was a cab driver. He attended South Philadelphia High School before dropping out his junior year to join the United States Air Force, where he eventually earned his high school diploma. Legambi is also the uncle of Philadelphia mobster George Borges. Unlike many other gangsters who started their careers in crime as teenagers or young adults, Legambi didn't have a criminal record before age 32 when he was arrested for cigarette smuggling. In the 1970s, he started to associate himself with mobster brothers Yogi and Salvatore Chucky Molino and worked as a bartender at a frequent mobster hangout. Legambi would become a protege of Molino, who in turn was close to powerful crime family member Nicodemo Scarfo. During this time, Legambi started making money helping run illegal bookmaking operations for the Molino crew. He earned a reputation as an expert in sports handicapping, particularly for football. By 1981, the Philadelphia crime family was being led by Scarfo, with Molino serving as his underboss. In 1985, Nicky Scarfo ordered the murder of Mafia associate Frankie Flowers D'Alfonso for refusing to pay tribute to him. When Philadelphia mobsters Thomas Del Giorno and Eugene Milano became government witnesses, they testified in court that on July 23rd, Legambi and Philip Narducci were the triggermen in the broad daylight hit, and Philip's brother Frank was the driver. Del Giorno, Milano, Molino, and Fafi Iannarella helped plan the murder. Legambi became a made man in the Philadelphia crime family in 1986 at the age of 47 years old. In 1987, Legambi was arrested alongside Scarfo and others for the D'Alfonso murder. On April 5, 1989, Legambi, Chucky Merlino, Nicodemo Scarfo, Francis Iannarella, plus Frank and Phil Narducci were all convicted of the murder and were all given life sentences. In 1992, an appellate court panel overturned the murder convictions, citing prosecutorial misconduct and trial court error. At the retrial in 1997, Legambi and his fellow defendants were acquitted of the murder. At the time of Legambi's release in 1997, the family was being run by Ralph Natale and Joey Merlino, the son of Legambi's mentor Salvatore. While Legambi was in prison, Merlino led a crew of young mobsters who fought a war and took over the Philadelphia crime family. One of these young mobsters was George Borgesi, Legambi's nephew. After the arrest of Merlino, Borgesi and several others in 1999, Legambi was chosen to take over as acting boss of the family. In 2001, Merlino was sentenced to 14 years in prison. After he took over, he remained in the shadows, rarely being mentioned in the media, while taking a much less trigger-happy approach to running the family. Legambi had a no-show job with Top Job Carpeting, run by fellow Philadelphia crime family member Mauro Goffredo. On May 23, 2011, Legambi and 14 other members and associates of the crime family were indicted by the FBI on racketeering charges related to illegal gambling operations, video poker gambling machines, and loan sharking. In February 2013, Legambi was denied bail after the jury dismissed gambling and extortion charges. On January 28, 2014, 2 juries were hung on the racketeering charges, and Legambi and Borgesi were acquitted and released. In 2020 court documents, Legambi was identified as the consigliere of the Philadelphia crime family.